Right, so welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling, well, a pretty massive one, honestly, Stephen King's The Stand.
Oh, yeah. Big one.
We've got, excerpts from the book itself, of course, some critical essays about it, even a few fan theories that we can kind of pick apart. So where are we going with this? I guess our mission here is to try and help everyone listening, really grasp what King was getting at with this vision he had of, well, the world after a plague pretty much wipes everyone out and the people left behind to deal with it all.
It's a world that feels so familiar in a way, but at the same time just completely alien.
Yeah.
And one thing about King is that he really doesn't hold back on those, like the gritty details.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just these big dramatic events, but it's the little details, the little things that make everything feel so, I don't know, real, almost unsettling. Like, I don't know if you remember that description of the houses on Shore Road, all shuttered blindly against the summer. It's like summer's supposed to be a time for, open doors, open windows, everything spilling out onto porches. And here, everything's locked up tight. It's like the world is holding its breath.
Yeah, it really creates that feeling of creeping dread, that something's just not right, even before we understand how bad things really are.
And the cause of all this, of course, is, well, Captain Trips, right? This super flu that basically wipes out, pretty much all of humanity.
Yeah.
And it's such a chilling idea, even more so when you consider King wrote this way back in the 70s, long before COVID made pandemics, part of our daily vocabulary.
Right. And it's striking how King doesn't just dwell on the virus itself. I mean, it's really the human response, or, well, the lack of response that's really at the heart of it. Like, we see the government trying to cover up just how bad things are. They're saying it's just a bad flu.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like real life all over again, right? Government's downplaying these huge crises.
And in that final broadcast, chills, right? My fellow Americans, this is a flat-out falsehood. It's like that moment when you realize, okay, nobody's in control anymore. And you're on your own.
Totally. It's that sudden lack of structure, no rules, everything just falls apart. And that's when the survivors really start to feel the weight of what happened.
It would have been easy for King to just focus on, just the physical challenges, right?
Mhm.
Finding food, staying away from the sick, all that. But, he goes so much deeper than that. He explores, like, the mental and emotional toll that this would take on you.
One of the things that really hit me in the excerpts we've got is this theme of isolation that just keeps coming up. Even when survivors find each other, there's still this heavy loneliness. They can't connect.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just not having, phones or internet.
Yeah, it's deeper than that. Like that part where Larry Underwood, the musician, he breaks down, right? And he's talking about how he feels like God has abandoned him. And he's with other survivors, but he's still just completely alone in his grief and his fear.
It's so powerful because it reminds us that even if you're surrounded by people, you can still feel totally alone, especially if you've been through something that the people around you haven't.
Absolutely. And that isolation, it can lead to some really, really dark choices. Like, we see characters making decisions that before the plague, they wouldn't even consider, right?
Yeah.
Driven by desperation, fear, just plain selfishness.
Totally. Like, take Larry again, right?
Yeah.
There's that part where he actually thinks about just leaving his friend Dewey, who's sick, just because he's slowing him down.
Yeah.
And it just shows you how even someone who seems like a good person, well, they're capable of some pretty messed up things when they're desperate.
Right, right. So let's talk about the survivors themselves. We've got excerpts that really zoom in on Franny Goldsmith, who's pregnant, figuring out this new world with a baby on the way. Then there's Larry, who's wrestling with guilt and this growing cynicism. And then there's Nick Andros, who's deaf and mute and ends up taking care of this young boy with developmental disabilities.
It's a pretty diverse group, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. And their struggles, they aren't just about, staying alive. It's about holding on to their humanity, who they are, in this world that's lost its way.
What's interesting is how King uses their disabilities,
Yeah.
right? So Franny being pregnant and Nick being deaf, not as weaknesses, but as a way to explore different kinds of strength, different ways to be resilient.
Exactly. Like, Franny's whole focus becomes protecting her unborn child. It's what drives her. It's a symbol of hope, right, for the future. And Nick, even though he can't communicate like everyone else, he becomes this protector, this silent guardian.
Yeah. There's this one quote from Nick's section that really stuck with me. On the memo pad, he wrote and underlined 2 words, "Let's try."
Mm-hmm.
It seems so simple, but when you think about it, With everything so hopeless, it's like this act of defiance,
Yeah.
this refusal to give up.
Totally. And that refusal to quit, that willingness to just keep trying, that's what separates the people who really survive, not just physically, but in their hearts, from the people who just get swallowed by the darkness.
Yeah, it's like King is saying that even when the world ends, when you think everything's gone, you still have a choice. Do you give in or do you keep fighting for something, someone, for yourself even? And that fight, it takes on a whole new level when we start getting into the supernatural stuff.
Yeah, exactly. King doesn't just give us a world after the apocalypse, he adds this whole other dimension, right? It's like a cosmic battle, good versus evil, happening right alongside the survivor struggles.
And this is where we meet Mother Abigail. She's 108 years old and, well, she becomes the spiritual leader. She's guiding the survivors through her dreams.
She's like this idea of faith as a source of strength,
Yeah.
showing you the way when everything is falling apart. Her dreams, they offer hope, guidance. It's like there's a reason for all this suffering.
But then there's the other side of that coin,
Uh,
right? Randall Flagg, the Dark Man, he also shows up in people's dreams, but he's tempting them, pulling them towards something way darker.
yeah, it's like King is setting up this choice, right? Light or darkness, faith or despair, and every survivor has to decide which path they're going to take.
And the dreams themselves, they're so vivid, so unsettling. Like Stu Redman, another important character we'll talk about more later. He has these nightmares over and over about rows and rows of crosses and just how cruel Flag is. It's like you're looking into the heart of this evil that's lurking beneath the surface.
It adds this layer of like psychological tension, right? Like even if you survive the plague, there's still this darker force out there that wants to get you, something that feeds on your fear and your doubt.
And that's what makes The Stand so gripping. It's not just about making it through the end of the world. It's about what kind of world you build from the ashes, what kind of person you decide to be, even when you're facing, well, both physical and spiritual challenges.
And those choices, those internal struggles, that's what drives the next part of our deep dive. We're going to see how these survivors start building their communities, how they deal with the challenges of creating something new, and how that battle between good and evil starts to play out in this world that's been, well, pretty much destroyed.
So yeah, get ready because things are about to get really, really interesting.
As we start to kind of move past the initial shock of everything falling apart, we begin to see these little glimmers of hope, little attempts to create some kind of order out of all the chaos.
Yeah, and that's really what The Stand is all about, isn't it? I mean, it's not just about surviving the apocalypse itself, but what comes next, you know? How do you even begin to start over when everything you knew is gone?
Right. And King explores this through the creation of two really distinct communities, each with a different vision for the future. So you have Mother Abigail's followers who are drawn to Boulder, Colorado by those prophetic dreams.
Okay, so they're trying to build a society based on working together, a shared sense of purpose, guided by Mother Abigail and her connection to something bigger than themselves.
Exactly. And then you have the folks who choose to follow Randall Flagg, and they gather in Las Vegas, a city that, well, it's always been associated with excess and kind of giving in to the darker side of human nature.
Yeah, and Fly's community is all about power and control and really just indulging those basic instincts that society, normally tries to keep in check.
I think it's so interesting how King uses these two very specific locations, Boulder and Las Vegas, to represent these contrasting ideologies. Like Boulder nestled in the mountains, almost like a return to nature, a simpler way of life. And Las Vegas, with all its neon lights and, that artificiality, it just screams power and the dangers of letting ambition run wild.
Yeah, and the survivors themselves, they gravitate towards one or the other based on their own internal compass, right? If you're searching for meaning and connection, you find yourself drawn to Mother Abigail. But if you crave power or you've just given up hope, you end up with Flagg.
It's like a social experiment playing out on this huge scale. What happens when you remove all the rules, all the laws, all the things that hold society together? Do people just revert back to their worst instincts, or do they find a way to cooperate and rebuild?
Right, and in Boulder, we see the Free Zone Committee struggling with these very questions as they try to create some kind of government.
And they face these huge challenges that, we see reflected in our own world, right? How do you ensure justice? How do you make sure resources are shared fairly? How do you balance freedom with the needs of the community?
Yeah, like that debate they have about what to do with the judge, this dangerous criminal they captured. He's a real threat, but in this new world, where do you draw the line between punishment and rehabilitation?
It makes you think about the nature of justice in a whole new way. Is it about revenge, about protecting yourself, or is there room for mercy, for second chances?
And it's not just about external threats either.
Yeah.
The committee also has to deal with disagreements within the group itself about how to rebuild. You've got people who want to follow Mother Abigail without question because they see her as a prophet. And then you have the folks who are a little more cautious. They want to use logic and reason.
It shows that even when people have the same goal, there can still be tension. How much power do you give to a leader even when you trust? And how do you balance faith and reason when you're making decisions that affect everyone?
Right. And then there's this looming threat of Randall Flagg and his followers. They're like this dark reflection of the Boulder Free Zone, a constant reminder that survival isn't just about rebuilding physically, but about resisting that pull towards the darker side of human nature.
And that temptation is always there. We see characters like Harold Lauder, who starts out drawn to Mother Abigail, but then he gets consumed by jealousy and resentment. He's like a representation of those who can't adapt. They cling to old ways of thinking and they become dangerous.
Right, his descent into darkness, it's like a warning about what happens when you let your emotions control you.
Hmm.
How easily envy and bitterness can twist, even someone who started with good intentions.
It reminds us that the fight for a better world isn't just out there. It's also within each of us. It's about facing your own demons, your own flaws, and choosing to be better even when it's hard.
So that brings us to another major theme in The Stand, right? Faith.
And it's not just about religious faith, though. That's definitely a part of it. It's about having faith in each other, faith in the possibility of something better faith, that even when things are terrible, there's still a reason to keep going.
Yeah. Mother Abigail embodies that, but we also see it in characters like Stu Redman and Glenn Bateman.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily religious in the traditional sense, but they have this underlying belief in humanity, in the idea that good can still win out.
And their faith is tested over and over. I mean, they experience betrayal, loss, unimaginable horrors, but they keep coming back to this idea that something good can still come from all the destruction.
And then you've got Trash Can Man, who's this really fascinating and terrifying example of how faith can be twisted. He's drawn to Randall Flagg with his almost religious fervor.
He's a warning about what happens when you follow blindly, when you stop thinking for yourself and just surrender to a charismatic leader, no matter how dangerous their ideas might be.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if King is saying that faith in itself isn't necessarily good or bad. It's how you use it, how you let it shape your choices that really matters.
Exactly. And as we head into the final part of our deep dive, we're going to see all of these themes, community, justice, faith, collide in this ultimate showdown between good and evil.
So we've seen these survivors go through so much, watch them come together. And now it feels like, well, we're heading right for that big climax in The Stand. Like everything King's been setting up is about to, I don't know, explode or something.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got these two powerful forces, right? Mother Abigail and her community in Boulder, then Flagg ruling over Las Vegas. And that tension between them has been building for, what feels like forever. And now it's all coming to a head.
Right. And it all kicks off with, well, a really risky move. The Free Zone in Boulder, they decide to send spies right into the heart of Flagg's territory. Like, talk about walking into the lion's den.
What's so interesting about this, I think, is that it really shows this difference in leadership, right? Mother Abigail, even though she's got the spiritual authority, she trusts the committee to make the call on something this important. It's a shared responsibility, almost like a democratic process, even with everything going on.
Yeah, which is the total opposite of Flagg. With him, it's all about control, manipulation, fear. He's surrounded by people who are loyal, sure, but, they're totally expendable to him.
And the people they choose for this mission, Dana Jurgens and Tom Cullen, their stories are just, I don't know, they just really get to you. Dana, she's so strong, so independent, and she volunteers knowing she might not make it back.
Yeah. And Tom, we've seen him grow so much with Nick taking care of him, and now he's stepping up to face this darkness, even with his challenges. It's like King is saying that anyone can be a hero, no matter who they are.
Exactly. It's not about being physically strong or, the smartest person in the room. It's about that inner strength, that willingness to stand up for what's right, even when you're terrified.
And what they go through, it's rough. Like that scene where Dana meets Flagg and he tries to tempt her, offering her power, playing on her doubts. It's one of the most chilling parts of the book.
It shows you how sneaky evil can be. It can look appealing, It can twist your fears and use your insecurities against you.
And then you have Tom on this mission that seems impossible. And you're rooting for him the whole way because, the fate of everyone in the Free Zone could depend on him.
Yeah. And it's in these moments when the characters are pushed to their absolute limits that you really see how brave and how strong they are. They aren't, superheroes or anything. They're just ordinary people who've been thrown into this crazy situation. And it's both inspiring and heartbreaking to see how they keep going.
Okay, so then, and this blew my mind when I first read it. Mother Abigail, she disappears. I mean, she's the leader, the symbol of hope, and then poof, she's gone.
Yeah, that's such a bold move by King, and it just throws you off balance. It makes the survivors question everything, their faith, their beliefs. They have to figure things out on their own.
It's like King is saying, all right, you've been relying on this incredible woman, but now you're on your own. What do you really believe? What's worth fighting for?
And then when she comes back, I mean, she's weaker, but she's still determined, and it makes her return even more powerful because she was gone. It's like faith isn't about just blindly following someone. It's about finding that strength within yourself, even when you feel lost.
Right. And when she gets back, her message is clear.
Yeah.
This isn't about building a new society, not yet. This is about facing this evil, this darkness, this fight for humanity itself.
Yeah. And then it's a huge turning point, Mother Abigail. She dies. It's a devastating loss for the community, but it's also what pushes them to finally take action.
It feels like her fight becomes their fight. Stu, Larry, Glenn, and Ralph's fight. They all have their flaws, but they step up. They know they have to defeat Flag.
And their journey to Las Vegas, it's not just about crossing this dangerous landscape. It's a journey of the soul. It
Yeah.
tests their willpower, their commitment to what they believe in.
And they deal with betrayals, disagreements, constant danger. I mean, it would be so easy to just give up, to say, this is just too much.
But they don't. They choose to keep believing in something bigger than themselves, something worth fighting for, even when it feels like there's no hope left.
And that final showdown with Flag, it's epic. It's not just about these few people anymore. It feels like the fate of all of humanity is at stake.
In King, he goes all in with the supernatural elements here. Explosions, God literally intervening. It's a battle that goes beyond anything we can see or touch.
It's like everything we've been talking about, faith, community, that struggle against darkness, it all comes together in this final fight.
Yeah, and even though the ending gives you this sense of resolution, good wins over evil, there's still this question that lingers.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really over? Can we ever truly get rid of evil? Or is it always there, waiting for us to let our guard down?
And I think that's what makes The Stand so brilliant. It's not just a story about the end of the world, it's a story about us,
Yeah.
but what we're capable of, the good and the bad.
It's one of those stories that stays with you. It makes you think, makes you question things, and it leaves you with this feeling of hope, but also a little bit of, well, I don't know, maybe a little bit of unease, too.
So as we wrap up our deep dive here, what really struck you about The Stand? Was it those individual struggles of the survivors, the challenges of starting over, or maybe that final confrontation with Flag?
For me, it's that idea of hope, that it never really goes away, even when things are at their darkest. These characters, they lose so much, but they find ways to connect, to support each other, to believe that things can get better.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even when it feels like the world's falling apart, there's still something worth fighting for, something worth believing in. And that's something we can all hold on to, especially now.